So we're going to go ahead and start Chapter 6, which starts Section 1 on page 162. The opposing sides. Following years of disagreement and negotiation, the tensions between the colonies and England had reached a critical point. After the colonies declared independence from England in July 1776, the war for freedom was unavoidable. Both the British and the Americans expected the war for independence to be short. The British planned to crush the rebellion by force. Most of the patriots, Americans who supported independence, believed the British would give up after losing one or two major battles. Few patriots believed John Adams when he predicted in April 1776, "We shall have a long and bloody war to go through." At first glance, the British had an overwhelming advantage in the war. They had the strongest navy in the world, an experienced, well-trained army, and the wealth of a worldwide empire. Britain also had a much larger population than the United States. Over 8 million people in Britain compared to only 2.5 million in the United States. The colonists suffered serious disadvantages. They lacked a regular army and a strong navy. American soldiers also lacked military experience, and weapons and ammunition were also short in supply. Many patriots belonged to militia groups, local forces, but they were volunteer soldiers who fought for short periods of time before returning home. The patriots faced other obstacles. Not all Americans supported the struggle for independence. Some people were neutral, taking neither side in the conflict. The Quakers, for example, would not participate in the war because they opposed all armed conflict. Still, other Americans remained loyal to Britain. The Loyalists. Those who remained loyal to Britain and opposed the war for independence were called Loyalists or Tories. At least one American in 5 was a Loyalist, perhaps as many as 1 in 3. Some people changed sides during the war, depending on which army was closer. Loyalist strength varied from region to region. In general, it was strongest in the Carolinas and Georgia and weakest in New England. Loyalists supported Britain for different reasons. Some remained loyal because they were members of the Anglican Church, headed by the British king. Some depended on British for their jobs. Many feared the disorder that would come from challenging the established government. Others simply could not understand what all the commotion was about. No other country, one loyalist complained, faced a rebellion arising from such trivial causes. The issues of independence disrupted normal relations. Friends and families were divided over their loyalty to Britain. For example, William Franklin, son of patriot Ben Franklin, was a loyalist who had served as a royal governor. As one Connecticut loyalist observed, "Neighbor was against neighbor, father against son, and son against father. He that would not thrust his own blade through his brother's heart was called an infamous villain." African Americans in war. Some African Americans also sided with the Loyalists. At the start of the war, the British appealed to enslaved Africans to join them. Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, announced that enslaved people who fought on the British side would be freed, and many men answered his call. Eventually, some of them ended up free in Canada, and others settled in British colony of Sierra Leone in Africa. Patriot advantages. The Americans possessed some advantages. They were fighting on their own ground and fought with great determination to protect it. The British, on the other hand, had to wage war in a faraway land and were forced to ship soldiers and supplies thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean. The makeup of the British Army in America also helped the Patriots. The British relied on mercenaries, hired soldiers to fight. The Americans called the mercenaries Hessians after the region in Germany where most of them lived. To gain support for the war effort, Patriots compared their own troops who were fighting for the freedom of their own land to the Hessians who fought for money. The Patriots had a much greater stake at winning the war than the hired soldier did. This personal stake gave the Americans an edge over the Hessians in battle. The Americans' greatest advantage was probably their leader, George Washington. Few could match him for courage honesty, and determination. The war might have taken a different turn without Washington steering its course. Raising an army. The Americans placed great value on liberty and personal freedom for citizens. After throwing off the rule of the British Parliament, they were unwilling to transfer power to their own Continental Congress. In some ways, the American Revolution was really 13 separate wars, with each state pursuing its own interest. As a result, Congress experienced difficulty enlisting soldiers and raising money to fight the war. Although the militia played an essential role in the Patriots' forces, the Americans also needed a regular army, well-trained soldiers who could fight anywhere in the colonies. The Congress established the Continental Army, but depended on the states to recruit or enlist soldiers. At first, soldiers signed up for 1 year of Army service. General Washington appealed for longer terms. If we ever hope for success, he said, we must have men enlist for the whole term of the war. Eventually, the Continental Congress offered enlistments for 3 years or for the length of the war. Most soldiers, however, still signed up for only a year. Women also fought with the Patriot forces. Margaret Corbin of Pennsylvania accompanied her husband when he joined the Continental Army. After he died in battle, she took his place. Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay also accompanied her husband in battle. The soldiers called her Moll of the Pitcher, or Molly Pitcher, because she carried water pitchers to the soldiers. As a teenager, Deborah Sampson of Massachusetts watched her brothers and their friend go off to war. Moved by a sense of adventure, she disguised herself as a boy and she enlisted. Fighting in New York. Most of the early battles involved few troops. At Bunker Hill, for example, about 2,200 British soldiers fought 1,200 Americans. The British had not yet won decisive victory over the Patriots. However, they had realized they would need more troops to end the war quickly. During the summer of 1776, Britain sent 32,000 troops across the Atlantic to New York. The British commander, General William Howe, hoped the sheer size of his army would convince the Patriots to give up. He was soon disappointed. Defeat on Long Island. Although Washington and the Patriots had fewer than 20,000 troops, they were determined to fight. In late August, the two sides clashed in the Battle of Long Island. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the Continental Army suffered a serious defeat in the hands of the British forces. One patriot, Nathan Hale, proved himself a hero at Long Island. A teacher from Connecticut, Hale volunteered to spy on British troops and disguise himself as a Dutch schoolteacher. The British discovered his true identity, however, and hanged him. According to tradition, just before his hanging, Hale's last words were, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Although the Americans showed bravery, they ran short of supplies for the army. In the autumn of 1776, a British officer wrote that many of the Patriot soldiers killed on Long Island had not been wearing shoes, socks, or jackets. They were also in great want of blankets, he said, predicting that the rebels would suffer greatly when the severe weather sets in. After the defeat on Long Island, Washington retreated to Manhattan, pursued by the British. By late November, the Continental Army had retreated across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. A low point. In the winter of 1776 to 1777, the Patriots' cause was near collapse. The size of the Continental Army had dwindled. Some soldiers completed their army of service and went home. Other soldiers ran away. Washington wrote his brother that if new soldiers were not recruited soon, I think the game is pretty near up. Still, Washington could not believe that the fight for liberty would truly fail.